Hello upgraders and welcome to today's Upgraded Ape Show. I'm your host Will Barron and today's show is a fascinating dive into the world of technology and the future. Clive Thompson is a science and technology journalist and he joins me on today's show to answer the questions: is technology changing our brains? Is Google making us dumb? And is artificial intelligence going to wipe us all out in the end anyway? Clive is a freelance journalist, blogger and author. He's written for the New York Times, Washington Post, Wired, Entertainment Weekly, and is a fountain of technology knowledge. Before we get into the show, just a quick note that this show is sponsored by Upgrade Your Brain, which is my new book. It's an uncommon guide to the mental energy, high IQ, and ultra memory of the elite. It is now available for pre-order at upgradedape.com, and it will ship on Monday. Everyone who pre-orders will get a signed copy. And the reviews that have come in so far from people who have read it have been really humbling to me, and everyone has seen it as a really positive guide to nootropics, supplements and other natural ways to upgrade your brain power. I'm really excited about the book launch and I could talk about it all day, so on that note I'm going to shut up and we're going to get straight on with the show.
Welcome to the Upgraded Ape Show, your daily dose of brain upgrades to help you kick life's ass. And here's your host, Will Barron.
Hi Clive, and welcome to the Upgraded Ape Show.
Glad to be here.
There's a whole bunch of stuff that I want to dive into, but first, can you just give the audience a little bit about your story and when did you start writing and when did you get interested in technology?
Sure. I got interested in technology first before writing because I'm 46 years old, and so I'm exactly the age of the kids that started learning how to program computers because they finally stopped being these room-sized huge monstrosities, and they were these little things that you could plug into a TV and use BASIC to program. So I was that first generation of kids that was reading computer magazines and learning how to program from it, and like sneaking time on the two computers at my middle school and my high school to learn how to program. And so I got a sense early on that computers were extraordinarily powerful devices because they could do not just one thing, but potentially limitless things if you could figure out the right instructions to give them. And then but I sort of knew I wanted to be a journalist, and I went to University of Toronto. I studied poetry and drama and literature, and I thought I'd originally write about politics. I was a student journalist. I learned how to write at the campus paper, but I graduated and I discovered that that was right around. This was in the early '90s, and so the internet was just starting to creep out into the mainstream. And so now all my previous childhood interests in computation and the way that computers change the way you think and communicate were becoming part of the mainstream. And that's when I realized, actually, I think I want to write about that. And it never stopped being interesting because basically every year there was some interesting new tweak to our everyday behavior, the way we live, the way we learn things, the way we take action on our ideas, the way we communicate. There's always some little new thing coming along, and it really became a way for me to write about almost anything, to write about politics, to write about culture, to write about business, the economy, because there was always some way that digital tools were affecting it. So that's kind of how I got into writing, basically.
Awesome. And just one thought while you were saying that then, did you realize at the time the power of computers, or is it looking back in hindsight? Did you, when you were first writing BASIC, realize, oh my God, this is limitless, the potential for this?
Yeah. I think I did have the epiphany back then, to the extent that anyone who's, sort of 12 years old can apprehend the dynamics of the larger world. I probably didn't think, one day this is going to dramatically change, inventory management, because I wasn't really aware that inventory management was a thing. But to the extent that I could see that these devices were crazily. I guess the thing that impressed me was how diverse the behaviors that could be coaxed out of a computational system were. I was one day I'm sitting here with this Commodore 64 that my father's friend had loaned to me. My parents never actually bought me a computer. I had to work off loan or some other people. So one day I'm using it to program a video game. The next day I'm using it to program sort of a fake AI that talks. The next day I'm programming music. So I was like, wow, this thing can sort of do almost anything, and that was really the epiphany. And it's funny because it's the thing that constantly gets computers and digital tools into sort of almost legal, I don't want to say legal trouble, but legal confusion, because we're accustomed to devices that just do one thing. Your car does one thing. It drives you from place to place. Your pencil does one thing. But because, when you sit down at your computer, your phone, it does all these different things. They become very difficult devices to legislate and to regulate. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to look into the future in a second and talk about how technology is going to change our brains and change our lives. But I think using an example a bit further along than what you described then of Google and how you can now Google pretty much the answer to anything. I'd love to just muse and dive into this with you of, other than cheating on pub quizzes, what difference is it making to society and our lives?
The pub quizzes are very interesting because you now find that there's very strict rules around no pulling out of phones during the trivia night at the pubs, because you'll start a fist fight that way.
Well, then when the hard question comes up, everyone seems to just need the toilet at that point.
Exactly. Yeah, the similar thing happened with chess software. Chess playing computers got so good that even on your phone, a chess thing can beat a grandmaster. So a couple of years ago, they had these grandmasters, this cheating scandal where someone kept on going to the bathroom, and it turns out that he was actually pulling at his phone, inputting all the positions into the phone and seeing what the phone software suggested, then going back out and cheating with it. So you see the going to the loo problem in all sorts of areas now. So what's happening to us with this relationship with Google? Well, when I first started writing my book, I frankly admit to being kind of worried about this. I thought I worried I was becoming too reliant on Google, and that it was somehow leaching knowledge out of my brain because I was not internalizing it anymore. After I finished my research, I became less worried about it because I realized that what we're doing with Google fits into a long-standing mental habit we have, which is that we humans love to rely on what's called transactive memory, which is the storing of knowledge in other people, right? So we're terrible. Our brains are pretty terrible at retaining details. We're very good at retaining the meaning and the gist of things. You read a book, you read an article, and you kind of, if you ask me a few days later, a few weeks later, what was that thing about? I can sort of tell you the general thing when I stumble on the details. If I want those details, I have to sort of go and grab the original article of the book. This is a long-standing part of the way our brains work. They're very parsimonious. So one of the ways we've always compensated is by relying on other people around us to help us remember details. So my wife and I, typical transactive memory relationship, two people that know each other well. She's really good at remembering certain things. She's much better. She's a TV critic. She knows a lot about TV and pop culture and remembers it in a way that I don't. She remembers details, some details of birthdays and events that happened. I'm really good at technical issues because I'm a technology journalist, and I'm really good at remembering physically where the car keys are and stuff like that. So together we are smarter than we are individually, and we're always asking each other things like where's the thing that did the thing? Do you remember this thing? That whole phenomenon of completing each other's sentences, very human thing, and that's because we're always, for thousands, tens of thousands of years, we've relied on this intimate relationship with people around us who supplement our memories, and for a long time it wasn't really possible to behave with external documents that way because they weren't very close to you. It was very difficult to go and refer to them. You might have had a copy of the Encyclopedia Britannica, but by Britannica's own admission, their own internal studies, people looked at their encyclopedias once a year, because it was kind of a pain in the butt to walk over there. You've got all human knowledge on your shelf, but it's actually going over to look at it is sort of a pain. Now that you have search engines or things that store your personal knowledge like Evernote, it is much easier just to flick to it and go, what was that thing? What was that thing? And it's very similar to this transactive relationship we have with humans. So I started getting less worried because transactive memory, study after study has shown it makes us a lot smarter than we are on our own. It helps us compensate for the natural difficulties that our brains have with details. So I got less worried about Google sort of making it hard for me to remember details, because it was always hard for me to remember details. This gives me it is true. Yeah, I will say it is true that if you want to be an expert in a particular domain, and if you want to be an all-around smart person, you do need stuff inside your head. Like, that doesn't change. Like, you still got to be you still should be the Renaissance ideal of someone who knows a little bit about everything is really the recipe for being quick on your feet, for being useful, humanly useful, and for also being a creative person. So that cultural pressure doesn't go away. And frankly, we've always had trouble getting, kids to like, one day you'll be glad you read about the War of the Roses. Why? Well, just one day you'll be glad. Trust us.
Clive, could that change in that if you've got Google Glass, for example, and that's listening to everything you're saying, and conversation is coming along of yada yada, and what year was this? Yeah. And then that could preemptively and proactively tell you the answer.
Sure. I definitely think that we'll see more tools that are aware of our conversation, aware of what we're talking about, that are helpfully trying to suggest bits of detail that will help us think. But I don't think it's going to happen in the kind of face-to-face conversation mode, because then I know this because I wore Google Glass for about 3 months last year. I own a pair, actually. Is that when you're in a social relationship, or you're talking to someone face to face, or you're on stage giving a presentation, or you're in any situation where it's what they call a really synchronous mode of communication. Like you're talking, someone else is talking back to you. It's very hard to pay attention to and absorb information from a different stream, right? This is a classic finding of multitasking. So I don't actually think we're going to be in those situations where we're being we've got the sort of the intelligent cue system in our whispering knowledge into our head, into our eye or our ear that we can absorb. Where that will be useful, where that AI that helps find things preemptively that we might need to know and help us, where that will be very useful is actually when we're thinking alone. When you're working on something by yourself and you're writing things out, and the AI is looking at what you're doing and what you're observing and saying, here's something that's useful. That is when you'll be in a fantastic transactive relationship. And I know, because I've talked to nerds who've built systems kind of like this for themselves, and they found it just enormously useful. Like this one gentleman who he did nothing. It was nothing more complicated than a little kind of a little subroutine that ran. It was always observing what he was typing, whether it was an email or writing a document or writing an article or writing a research stuff. It would chunk like the last sentence, and it would look at it, and it would compare it to everything he'd ever written on his computer, in his email or anything. And if it found, and it would just sort of have this little list of things saying, look at this, and he would constantly be reminded of things that he had forgotten he'd read or written or clipped or saved. And so it was this genuinely useful back and forth with the machine. So I think we'll see lots of those tools for when we are working and thinking out there on our own. We won't see them so much in face-to-face interaction because it's very hard to juggle that extra stream.
I guess the difference there is that you can slow down and look at other stuff when you're working on your own, but you're not in control of things when you're working side by side.
Yeah.
And you mentioned AI then, Clive. And this is something that I wanted to ask about, and using the chess as an example. So using your phone or whatever computer chip to beat a grandmaster, is that program got intelligence, or is that program just looking at patterns and just being able to recognize patterns better than a human can?
This is a really great question with a lot of deep philosophical ramifications, because now you're getting
deep, Clive. Go for it, mate.
Now you're getting the question of what is human intelligence, right? And there are wide-ranging debates about this. There are some theorists who basically say, really our brains are just extraordinarily complicated pattern matchers. So really, human intelligence is nothing more than a massively scaled up version of what that computer is doing. That computer is, in one sense, doing a very crude, just like, well, let me look at the moves that are out there. Let me look at all possible moves. Let me compare those to games in the past, and let me crunch all possible moves, 8 moves out. So in one sense, that what the machine's doing is very dumb and seems very unhuman like, because we humans rely on this deeply imbibed knowledge and intuition. Like you talk to a chess master and you say, okay, so how many moves can you see out? And the grandmaster will say, I only see one, the best one. Like our human knowledge and intuition arrives as sort of this very organic insight. We can't always say where it came from, but it's based on our lifetime of learning and observing and knowing. So in one sense, what the machine's doing seems very crude in comparison. But there are philosophers in the mind that say, well, maybe what our minds are doing is nothing more than an extraordinarily complex version of that. So if you got computers and AI that could go very, very, very fast, like quantum computer fast, you could see a computer producing flashes of insight that were like that, because they would finally be able to move at the speed and the depth. I'm sort of on the fence about this. I think that there are certain things about the way the human brain is an organic thing, and so part of the genius that makes us humans is not just the sort of precision and speed and billions and billions and trillions of connections that are happening every second, but also the errors, the sort of the stuff that goes wrong, the sort of the mistakes we make, the sort of horrible, stupid biases we have, the fact that our memory decays and we misremember things. Weirdly, that stuff is actually productive of human genius, right? It's a lot of human intelligence comes out of what a machine would regard as errors, bad things, So
you could build all that into a machine, though.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's the thing. That the counter argument is, well, maybe you could sort of model human mistakes. Alan Turing, the guy who invented the Turing test, the sort of idea that if a machine could talk to another human over like a chat line, and the human could not tell that it was a machine, that it was effectively passing sort of a human test. You could say it was human-like, right? And well, he was a smart guy, and he understood that if you match the behavior, and most people can't tell, maybe that's that's good enough. And so he actually, when he was building when he was building his Turing test, he suggested that one of the things the machines should do is make mistakes, because making mistakes is human. And so to be able to pass as a human, the machines would actually need to occasionally screw things up, right? So yes, you're exactly right. I mean, Turing understood the idea of modeling errors, and there are people that do software that intentionally try and make very large logical leaps that might be wrong, but might be also wind up being creative, because a certain amount of creativity is really us taking two things that don't seem to match together and slamming them together, and lo and behold, something new comes out of it, right? So it's entirely possible that you could create computer models that would help come up with creative ideas potentially in that mode too. I never say never. I think I always say this stuff is way harder than we think it is. Partly because there's so many mysteries behind how human brains work. When you talk about modeling them, you get into that problem. I'm where I see the real value in the short run. When I say short run, I mean like decades. Is that to me, the real advantages come from merging the specifically alien and inhuman processes of machines with the very human processes of us, right? So what tends to produce really amazing stuff is when you can take what machines do really well, which is counting and being absolutely accurate and being able to to juggle massive amounts of data, find invisible patterns in them. When you marry that with our human ability to make these weird, intuitive, messy, half-formed leaps of intuition and the ability to extract wisdom and meaning from things, you get an unbelievably powerful combination. And so I'm less interested in emulating human cognition by getting a machine that works like a human than in getting machines to work like machines, but in ways that really supplement and complement human intelligence. If you get my drift.
Yeah, for sure. And this is a bit out there, and it's something that I've thought about in the past, and you're probably a good person to ask. You mentioned a couple of things then that the human brain can do better than a machine, and machines can obviously do lots of stuff better than us. do you think we'll get to a Matrix-like point where machines can do everything better than us other than have these sparks of inspiration? So then it gets to the point where they're manufacturing themselves and they're using us to develop them further rather than machines supplementing our kind of needs, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, the dystopia. Well, that's another good question. I suppose I'm intuitively skeptical of the idea because that would require the AI have intent, and intent is super complicated. We're still wrestling with the extent to which humans have free will at all, right? I mean, on a religious level, Augustine. Christian thinkers have been wondering about that. If one were to believe that an omniscient God exists, what's left for free will? So they've been wrestling with free will for a long time. But then the materialist sort of revolution in the understanding of neurology and neurophysiology has produced these very unsettling insights that that seem to indicate that some of our bodily movements and mental epiphanies appear to be a situation of our system acting first and our consciousness later on retconning intent onto it, right? Like, I intended to do that, So I have trouble imagining what intent would look like in a machine system, a system that basically reasoned and said, well, I need to procreate myself, so I need to kill all these humans or enslave them. Like that's intent is a qualitatively different thing from just basic, logic. So that's the first tripping point I have with thinking the machines are going to take over. The second point is that sometimes I think that we're unprepared for how useless genuinely intelligent machines might be. If you had a machine that really, could think and had some sort of volition, it might decide that really all it wants to do is sit around calculating pi to the infinite degree. it would just appear to shut down. And, hello, knocking on it, is anyone in there? It's like, wow, the thing just turned itself off. Like, no, it's decided the most interesting thing is doing something that we regard as completely useless, right? I mean, so we always have this idea that an alien intelligence will have the same desires we have, and it might not. We humans have all sorts of irrational desires. What might the irrational desires of machines be? Like, it might not be to kill us. It might be to do something that we regard as spectacularly useless, but it finds unbelievably pleasant. So sometimes I think we're not being weird enough in our dystopias. Like we always project something that's dangerous to us as opposed to something that's useless to us, which might be even more stark and immediate. I mean, it's almost like Douglas Adams. They build the big think computer and ask it the meaning of life, universe, and everything, and it comes back, decades later with the answer 42. He sort of intuited that like what seems like an absolutely rich, fantastic epiphany for a machine might be head-scratchingly pointless to us. Now, smarter people than me, though, are really worried about this, right? Stephen Hawking, is on the record as saying, we should not be trying to communicate with alien species, because any alien species that has survived to the point of being able to receive our transmissions is likely to be absolutely hostile and lethal to us. So we should keep our heads low. And he's recently said he's really worried about AI. These are people who, I spend comparatively little time in my reporting thinking about the future. I'm mostly a person, as I like to say, I don't predict the future, I predict the present, because people are so focused on the future, they do comparatively little analysis of what's actually happening here and now. And if you look at what's happening here and now, it's often incredibly interesting and ill understood. So I don't spend enough time, I think, pondering the future to be even the best authority on this. And some of the best authorities are absolutely white knuckled with fear, like Hawking. So that would be the argument in favor of caution, basically.
And I think now you've said that, and it really puts in perspective, and it's really interesting. So thank you for that insight. But all our thoughts are really egotistical that a computer would want to harm us. And you're right, they probably would have bigger challenges to, once they were self-sustaining, they'd probably have bigger challenges of maths and physics and other things to work out on their own that they kind of just put us to one side. And keep us plugged in.
They could decide, actually, we need to calculate all the possible multiverses in the quantum foam, and boom, they're off. And like, again, we're like, hello, could you help us figure out cancer? And they're like, we don't care. We're working on something much more interesting. And, this is going to take us 8 million years, but that's cool because we're computers and we're immortal. So, we'll talk in 8 million years. And like, that's it, all the AI that we create just decides to ignore us, for 8 million years. Like that strikes me as an even more likely result than sort of death, basically.
For sure. Well, coming back to the here and now then, Clive, what's the most exciting area of technology that you're looking at, and with a focus on brain or health or something along those lines?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that is going to be really interesting over the next couple of years is the way that technology weaves itself into our I suppose, bodies, I guess. But I don't mean necessarily in terms of implants and stuff like that, although that's definitely coming along. But even just at the interstitial level of being woven into our clothing, into the world around us, right? So, they call it a bunch of different things. They call it the Internet of Things. They call it wearable computing. I actually think a better way to talk about it is what Mark Weiser of Xerox PARC referred to it almost 20 or 30 years ago. He called ubiquitous computing, the idea that there's little bits of intelligence all around us. And this to me has enormous promise and enormous peril. It's sort of in equal parts. The more we sort of spread intelligence into devices around us, in a way, I think we could see some really great things coming out of this. I mean, I recently wrote about how it was really interesting. If you talk to people who started using, they have multiple devices around them. They have a laptop, they got a tablet, they got a desktop, they got a phone, and they've started we all know the problem of distraction, where you're trying to get something done on your computer, and there's 9 different screens all barking for your attention. You wind up getting nothing done because you keep on getting pulled from one thing to another. Well, they've started basically. I talked to a lot of people who started saying, well, okay, I'll do my email just on my phone. So that I never actually do it on my computer. So I just separately switch over and do my email for 10 minutes, like once an hour, and get distracted that way. And I'll do like all the fun stuff like Twitter and Facebook and whatnot, Instagram, on my tablet. And they separate these devices out. And this is exactly what Mark Weiser predicted 20 or 30 years ago, which is that instead of he thought it was sort of crazy that we'd do all of our computational work on one device. He thought it was because he foresaw that this would become a sort of a bottleneck problem, where if you're staring at one thing, it's easy to get for tasks to sort of layer on top of tasks and become lost or distracting. Or as I like to joke, you think you get a 27-inch, iMac screen, and you think that's really big. But imagine if I walked you into your new office. I hired you at a company, said, here's your office. You got a lovely office by yourself. It's fantastic. Tons of room. You got a couch you can take naps on. It's all private. Here's your desk. It's made out of wonderful, old or recovered oak from a crashed, Civil War boat. But it's 27 inches across. And you'd be like, are you mad? I can't get anything done on a 27-inch desk, And I'd be like, well, it's as big as your computer screen. And so we think that these screens are big, that we can, but really they're terrible. They're just these tiny little things. What we need is lots of devices all around us that do all sorts of different things, so that, you could imagine like having, and this is what people are working on, where, you have screens as plentiful as paper. You just throw them around the room. You sort of have your desk filled with them. Each of them is doing one different thing. You can pick them up. You can hand them to someone else. So as we get more intelligence built into devices all around us that help us think, we'll actually simultaneously be able to weirdly be less distracted, because you can now pick up just one screen and go sit in a chair and look at just that thing instead of having 9 different things competing for attention. And we'll also find that we get all these physical cues built back into our cognition. So that's beginning to happen, because it's now getting cheap enough to have computation woven into everyday objects, to have information displayed and woven into everyday objects. And I think this is something that is really fun and exciting, and is going to start breaking open new ways of collaborating and thinking and paying attention to the world. The downside, of course, is that this Internet of Things has a potential to take all the sort of insecurities and privacy problems that we have with just our phones and our computers and multiply them across the entire world. Right now, if every object in your if your shirt is sort of a computing device that knows where it is, knows what you've done, that becomes another data point that marketers or governments can sort of hoover up and know about you, right? So we're on the precipice of having some really exciting cognitive enhancements along the way, but we are also on the precipice of having even more of these really gnarly problems of privacy and autonomy. So that's one thing that I think is really interesting and challenging and exciting and like oh crap, sort of alarming. I think that I think the other thing that I'm sort of I've seen on the horizon and it's kind of interesting because I think I've decided I think it's sort of coming. I used to think it's not coming, but now I'm starting to think it is. Is the sort of I guess the bad word, although it's kind of a good word depending on you look at the balkanization of our digital world. Right now, there's kind of one internet. All of our devices and websites and services are communicating on this one transport, and a lot of them are very centralized. There's kind of these very few large services that a lot of people use. And Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, Google Docs, and that's become sort of a problem on a civic level because like we're doing a lot of this civic cultural activity on these centralized services that are very powerful and useful and great. We get great stuff out of them, but they also insert an awful lot of commercial power into everyday life, and they also make it again easier for the state to sort of snoop on us because if everything you do is on Google, there's one-stop shopping for them to get everything you want. So I used to think that was kind of like just a forward inertia that was not going to change, that we were just going to see more and more centralization of things. But partly because of, I guess, the Edward Snowden revelations, I've seen this kind of this increase of nerds and geeks off in the peripheries, the margins, furiously creating all these tools to try and create kind of spaces to talk and share cognition and share thinking and do all these great forms of public thinking, this externalization of thought that's happened online, except do it in like modes that they control, that run off, instead of running off a Facebook server, they run off their own computer, and they're just talking one to another and doing these very rich forms of cognitive interaction, except that they actually control it now. And in some respects, it actually it more resembles the internet of 25 years ago than it does the one of the last 10 years. And I would be tempted to dismiss this as just privacy freakazoid nerd stuff, except that it's growing and growing and growing. I'm starting to think, this is going to be the next shift. In fact, there's even this guy that I profiled who's like created a completely separate form of DNS. DNS is the thing that basically allows computers, to talk to one another. It's one of the backbones of the internet. He created an alternate one, so he's essentially running an alternate internet on top of you can't see the stuff on that internet unless you install his alternate DNS, and suddenly there it is. And they're like multiverses, right? Like the one doesn't interact with the other, and you could make. He could make dozens or hundreds or thousands of those. And that becomes another really interesting perspective, that we could start to see these very alternate rival spaces that afford higher or lower levels of visibility and privacy and autonomy. So there's some very weird things that I think might start happening to the basic shape of how we interact with each other that I think are really interesting. I see that trend as well, Clive, in the not so much Facebook, Twitter, more deeper than that, and the hosts and the ISPs. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're getting more and more powerful and more, well, they're coming more and more into the public light of throttling certain companies and asking them to pay some of their bills and all that, and that's a whole nother conversation. And I know we're coming up to time now, so I just want to wrap things up with you by asking you a couple of questions, if that's all right. Sure,
quick fire questions.
Let's go for some quick ones. Yep.
What is one book that you'd recommend for the Upgraded Ape audience?
One book that I would recommend to the audience. Actually, here's a really good one. It's a funny one for me to recommend in a way, but it is so terrific, and it opened my eyes in such interesting ways. It's called Too Much to Know by Anne Blair. And she is a scholar of the history of books at Harvard, and it's a book about information overload in the sort of 15th to 17th centuries. It's about the origins of our modern explosion of information just before and just after the Gutenberg press, and how people freaked out and then adapted to it. And when you read it, it feels so astonishingly contemporary. It feels exactly like the sort of cognitive challenges and delights that we're going through right now as we build this new sort of explosion of externalized thought. So it is like it is more than anything else. I think when I wrote my book, it was a real eye opener that helped me contextualize what's happening now in the grand sweep of history. So I would say everyone to go out there and read not something about the future, but something about the past, because it will give you a trajectory that helps you see what's coming more easily. Like the best way to see what's coming forward is to follow the dots from the past so you can create the line. And I would have everyone go and read Anne Blair's Too Much to Know.
It sounds fascinating. It also sounds like the bottleneck has always been the same, and that is our attention and our inability to only focus on one thing at once.
Yes, exactly. And so
that's the big problem to solve, I guess, if it's possible to solve it.
Well, no, but the thing is, it is possible. This is the thing. The thing I found so heartening was that we tend to do the same things over and over again, right? So we get surplus of information, and we freak out because it seems like there's too much. And Leibniz, the mathematician, literally said he described book publishing as this horrible mass of books. It continues to grow and will crowd out any thought, because how are you ever going to find the good stuff amongst the crap? And this seemed like a real problem. And we didn't have, back when he was writing about that, we didn't have, the Dewey Decimal System. We didn't have libraries. We didn't have regimens for note taking and note sharing. And yet, one by one, we sort of invented all these things. Like we had to invent how to take notes in the book, how to formalize them so you could show them to someone else. We had to invent the idea of a library that was so well organized that anyone could walk in and get a book instead of a trained librarian. And so, and we developed all these social tricks too. Like we developed these ways of paying attention to what each other were seeing and reading to help us sort each stuff. We developed ways of on the fly sort of broadcasting what we were reading and seeing to other people via little newsletters and via columns in newspapers. And you look at it and you're like, oh yeah, that like the way we cope with it back then is sort of the way we're coping with it now, and this will probably be a fractal iteration throughout time. So in one sense, like you're right, we were always coping with the attentional problem, but we're kind of good at it. Like it can take us decades to fumble through. And that was the other thing I think that was useful in reading it, is it made me a little more patient about our everyday world. It made me realize that we are really early on in the sort of evolution of digital tools, and just as context, it took decades for people to hit upon the idea of adding page numbers to books, right? You got a book, you read it, that was pretty cool. Where was that thing you read? Who knows? Got to flip the whole book and find it again. Like it was the idea of tools for orienting yourself in a book took a long time to emerge, and I feel like maybe the internet and digital world we're looking at now is like equivalent to a book with no numbers on it. Like we haven't hit upon the things that are going to make this stuff like genuinely cognitively useful. So it made me more patient with the rate of progress too.
But the massive force multiplier there would be to focus on two things at once. Like, forget putting things in order and increasing the ability to focus on the good stuff and not the crap. If you could focus on more than one thing at once, then that would instantly change the world. And I don't know if it's physically possible to do with our brains, or whether you'd need some mental, neurochemical crazy enhancement to do it. And on that note, Clive, exactly. I'm gonna have to wrap things up, and you're gonna have to come back on the show.
Absolutely,
because I know you've got another interview coming up shortly, and I don't want you to be getting in trouble and overrunning with me, mate.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful, great conversation, sir. I enjoyed it.
Honestly, Clive, you'll have to come back on. We'll talk about this more in more depth, but just for our listeners now, can you tell us where we can find out more about you,
Sure.
your blog, and also your book?
All right, my book is called Smarter Than You Think, How Technology is Changing Our Minds for the Better. It's available in print. It's available in ebook format. You can read a sample of it at my website, smarterthanyoutthink.net. And I am. You can follow me on Twitter at I'm Pomeranian99. Long story behind that one. I'll tell you next time. And that's probably the easiest way to find out what's going on and what I'm publishing, because I'm a magazine journalist. I also write for Wired and the New York Times and Smithsonian, so I'm publishing stuff, and that's the easiest way to keep up with what's happening is via my Twitter feed.
Awesome stuff, Clive. Well, I just want to say thanks again for your time today. Really appreciate it, and thanks for coming on the Upgraded Ape Show.
We'll talk soon.